It was supposed to be a quiet stop at a desolate gas station on the edge of nowhere. Scarlett, a reserved yet enigmatic woman, was refueling her beat-up sedan when the rumble of Harley-Davidsons shattered the stillness. A rowdy biker gang roared in, their leader flashing a predatory grin her way. They underestimated her, mistaking silence for submission. But Scarlett wasn't prey. She was a storm wrapped in flesh. By the time the night was over, they would learn that the hunter could quickly become the hunted. Scarlett sat in her aging sedan, the rhythmic clicking of the gas pump her only company. The sun had sunk below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in deep purples and grays. Tonight wasn't supposed to be eventful. It was supposed to be routine. The ground trembled faintly, a low rumble growing louder. Scarlett's fingers tightened around the steering wheel as a row of motorcycles appeared on the highway, their headlights piercing the darkness. 7 bikers roared into the gas station, their presence loud and invasive. They parked haphazardly, engines growling as their laughter and shouts filled the air. Scarlett's shoulders tensed, but she kept her gaze fixed on the pump. One of the bikers, a broad-shouldered man with a patch that read Viper, sauntered over to her car. His boots crunched against the gravel as he leaned against the pump, his leather vest revealing heavily inked arms. He smirked, his eyes scanning her as if she were a curiosity. "Well, well," he drawled. "What's a lady like you doing out here all alone?" Scarlett didn't answer. She replaced the gas nozzle and reached for her receipt, her movements calm. Viper's grin widened, his friends whistling and jeering behind him. "Not much of a talker, huh? That's okay. We like a little mystery." He stepped closer. Scarlett's voice was steady. "Just passing through." Something in her tone made Viper pause. Was it defiance? Or something darker? Another biker, a wiry man called Snake, joined them. "Come on, Viper, don't scare her off. We're just being friendly." Friendly wasn't the word Scarlett would have used. The air crackled with tension. She wasn't afraid, though. Fear was a luxury she'd discarded years ago. Viper chuckled, raising his hands. All right, no harm done." He stepped back but didn't stray far, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Scarlett climbed into her car deliberately. As she closed the door, she heard one of them mutter, "She thinks she's too good for us." Her engine sputtered to life and she drove toward the exit. A sudden roar from one of the bikes made her glance in the rearview mirror. Snake had mounted his motorcycle and was following her, his headlight glaring in the darkness. Scarlett's jaw tightened. She hadn't wanted trouble, but trouble had found her. She gripped the wheel, her mind calculating her next move. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through wilderness. If they wanted a game, she'd play, but on her terms. Snake revved his engine, pulling alongside her car. He gestured for her to roll down the window, but she ignored him. Instead, she tapped the brakes, forcing him to swerve and regain control. Back at the station, the others hollered in amusement. Viper watched her taillights disappear, his smile fading into something colder. "Looks like the lady's got some fight in her," he muttered. "Should we go after her?" one of them asked. Viper nodded, his expression hardening. "Nobody makes a fool of us. Let's show her what happens when you mess with the Vipers." Scarlett's pulse quickened as she saw headlights multiplying in her mirror. They were coming for her. She'd hoped to avoid confrontation, but now it seemed inevitable. Taking a deep breath, she pulled off the road onto a dirt path, her tires kicking up dust. The game had begun. The dirt path Scarlett turned onto was narrow, flanked by dense trees cloaked in shadows. Her headlights illuminated just enough to navigate. Behind her, the roar of motorcycles grew louder, headlights bouncing like predatory eyes. Scarlett's grip tightened on the wheel. This wasn't her first chase, but it had been years. A flicker of exhilaration stirred before she forced it down. Her lips pressed into a line as she calculated her moves. These woods were her advantage. The first turn came fast. Scarlett yanked the wheel, her car skidding on loose dirt. One biker overshot the curve, almost toppling before recovering. "Amateurs," she muttered. Behind her, Viper barked orders. "Stay on her. She can't outrun us." His arrogance rang loud, but Scarlett wasn't running. She was leading. The path forked, one way into a shallow ravine, the other climbing a steep incline. Scarlett chose the incline, knowing it would slow her but force the bikers to maneuver. Snake surged ahead, his bike closing the gap. Scarlett glanced at her mirror. Snake was nearly parallel, his tires skidding on gravel. She veered closer, forcing him to retreat or collide. He hesitated, a split-second decision that cost him. His bike wobbled, striking a rock, and he tumbled into the brush. The others hesitated, their formation disrupted, but Viper pressed on. Snake was down, but 6 remained. At the top of the incline, the road leveled out. The bikers struggled to crest the hill. Scarlett knew she needed to thin their numbers more before her final move. Her car jolted in a rut, but she kept control. Her eyes darted to the glove compartment where a sleek pistol lay. She didn't want to use it. Not yet. Precision, not chaos. Ahead, a fallen tree spanned the path. It hadn't been there on her last trip. Scarlett floored the gas, aiming for the narrow gap between the trunk and the edge. Her car scraped through, splinters flying. Behind her, brakes screeched. One biker hit the tree, his wheel buckling as he was thrown forward. Scarlett didn't look back. The woods opened, the trees thinning. She recognized the clearing, a place she had trained herself to fight, to outwit anyone foolish enough to challenge her. Slowing, she stopped her car. The roar of motorcycles grew closer. Scarlett stepped out, the cool air brushing her face. She stood tall, framed by her headlights. The bikers skidded to a halt, forming a semicircle. Viper dismounted, his boots crunching dirt. His smirk returned, but unease flickered in his eyes. "You gave us a hell of a chase," he said, his voice low. "But this is where it ends, sweetheart." Scarlett reached into her jacket and pulled out a blade, its edge gleaming. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. Viper's smirk faltered. "I warned you," Scarlett said, her tone ice-cold. "You should have left me alone." She stepped forward, the first move in a game they'd never realized they were playing. The clearing was silent except for the low rumble of bikes. Scarlett stood firm, her blade gleaming in the glow of her headlights. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado faltering. Only Viper maintained his smirk, though doubt flickered in his eyes. "Lady, you're outnumbered," he said, motioning to the semicircle of leather-clad men. "You really think you can take us all on?" Scarlett didn't answer. Words were wasted on men like him. Instead, she shifted her stance, her silence a challenge. A wiry man with a jagged scar sneered. "She's bluffing. Let me handle this." Without waiting, he lunged forward, cracking his knuckles. Scarlett let him close, her muscles coiled. When he attacked, she struck, her blade slashing his arm. He stumbled back, howling, blood dripping through his fingers. The others froze, their confidence shaken. She moved swiftly in their hesitation, targeting weak points. A slash to one's knee, a kick to another's side. Chaos erupted as 2 went down, the rest regrouping. Viper barked commands, his voice cutting through the noise. "Stop messing around! Take her down!" One swung a chain at her head, the metallic whistle slicing the air. Scarlett ducked, retaliating with a kick to his knee. The joint buckled and he collapsed with a grunt. Despite the odds, she remained composed. Her strikes were calculated, each movement efficient and deliberate. Viper finally stepped in, pulling a hunting knife from his belt. "You've got guts, lady," he said, his tone almost respectful. "But now, you're out of luck." Scarlett met his gaze unfazed. "You should have stayed at the gas station." He lunged, aiming for her midsection. Scarlett sidestepped, their blades clashing with a metallic ring. Around them, the remaining bikers hesitated, watching the fight unfold. Viper was skilled, but Scarlett was faster. She feinted left, pivoted right, and slashed his side. He snarled in frustration. "You're good," he admitted, clutching his wound. "Better than I expected." She didn't respond, already reading his next move. When he lunged again, she used his momentum to disarm him, twisting his arm until the knife dropped. Viper hit the ground hard, groaning as Scarlett pressed her blade to his throat. "Call them off," she said, her voice icy. Viper's pride warred with reality. After a tense pause, he raised a hand, signaling retreat. The bikers exchanged glances but obeyed, helping their injured comrades. Engines roared to life as they left one by one, Viper lingering last. "This isn't over," he growled, spitting blood. "You'll regret this." Scarlett didn't respond, watching until the bikes disappeared into the night. Only then did she exhale, her grip on the blade loosening. The clearing fell silent, the adrenaline ebbing to reveal a familiar ache. Old wounds, both physical and emotional. She slipped into her car, staring out into the dark woods. Men like Viper didn't take defeat lightly. He would be back. Scarlett's jaw tightened as she started the engine. This was far from over, but she would be ready. Scarlett's car rumbled down a deserted stretch of highway, the night's events replaying in her mind. Viper wouldn't let this go. Men like him never did. Her hands tightened on the wheel. It was time to stop reacting and start planning. She pulled off the highway onto an unmarked dirt road. The path wound through dense forest, barely visible in the dark. At the end, a small cabin came into view, modest and nearly invisible among the trees, a sanctuary and a fortress. Scarlett parked and stepped out, the cool air brushing her skin. She opened the trunk, revealing an array of tools and weapons neatly organized. She grabbed a black duffel bag and began packing with precision. A hunting knife, rope, radios, and a few traps. Inside the cabin, she spread a map across the wooden table, its surface marked with red circles. Every mark was a trap she'd set or an area she controlled. These woods weren't just her home. They were her advantage. Her radio crackled to life, breaking the silence. "We found her car," a voice said, gruff and angry. It wasn't Viper, but one of his men. Scarlett's eyes narrowed. Turning off the cabin light, she moved to the window. Headlights pierced the trees in the distance. They were already searching for her, faster than she'd anticipated. Viper was more dangerous than she thought. Grabbing the duffel, she slipped out the back door into the woods. The darkness enveloped her, but she moved with ease, knowing the terrain intimately. She crouched behind a tree as the sound of engines rumbled closer. Scarlett needed to draw them away from the cabin and into her traps. She reached into her bag, activating a device. A distant explosion echoed through the forest. "Did you hear that?" one biker shouted. "Split up," Viper ordered. Scarlett smiled grimly. Splitting up was exactly what she wanted. Moving swiftly, she set traps along their paths, a tripwire here, a noise-triggered flare there. The first trap triggered moments later. A loud snap echoed as a weighted net slammed a biker to the ground. His curses were muffled as he struggled against the net. "Over here," another called, but Scarlett was already gone. One by one, the bikers fell into her traps. A hidden pit swallowed a bike whole, its rider thrown clear. Another tripped a flare, blinding him and sending him sprawling. Scarlett watched from the shadows, her heart steady. This wasn't revenge. It was survival. Finally, only Viper remained. His bike idled in the clearing as he scanned the woods. "Come out, you coward!" he shouted. Scarlett stepped into the moonlight, her blade gleaming. "You're alone now," she said, her voice calm. "Ready to finish this?" Viper dismounted, his hands clenched. "You think you've won," he snarled. Scarlett's gaze didn't waver. "Then prove it." They circled each other, the clearing deathly quiet. Scarlett's traps had leveled the odds, but this was the moment she had been preparing for. Viper lunged, and the battle began. The clearing exploded into action as Viper lunged. Scarlet sidestepped his attack, her blade deflecting his knife with a metallic ring. His strikes were heavy, precise, but she was faster. Years of training had honed her reflexes, turning the fight into a deadly dance. Viper pressed forward, his blade slashing through the air. Scarlet parried, twisting to avoid his next strike. Her blade nicked his arm, drawing blood. He staggered back, fury flashing in his eyes. "You're good," he growled, "but this ends now." Scarlet didn't respond. She focused on his movements, anticipating his next move. He feinted left, lunging right, but she was ready. A sharp elbow to his ribs left him gasping. Still, he recovered quickly, his knife slashing dangerously close. The fight was interrupted by the faint rumble of engines. Reinforcements. Scarlet's heart sank. Viper's smirk grew wider as the sound drew closer. "Looks like you're out of time," he taunted. "My boys are here, and there's nowhere left to run." Scarlet's gaze flicked to the trees. She had to move. With a swift kick, she knocked Viper off balance, buying herself precious seconds. She darted into the woods, her footsteps silent on the forest floor. Behind her, Viper roared, "Don't let her escape!" The forest became a blur as Scarlet sprinted. This was her territory, her ally. The dense trees and uneven terrain slowed the bikers, but she needed more than speed. Her traps would even the odds. The first trap, a tripwire hidden in the underbrush, claimed its victim moments later. The sound of a bike crashing was followed by a string of curses. Scarlet didn't stop. Every second counted. A hidden pit covered with leaves caught another biker, his shouts of surprise echoing through the trees. Scarlet allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction before focusing on the next obstacle. The remaining bikers were relentless, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Scarlet spotted a narrow path veering left. She took it, knowing it would lead to higher ground. The incline slowed her pursuers, giving her time to plan. Reaching the top, she crouched behind a boulder, catching her breath. Below, the bikers' formation was scattered, their numbers thinned by her traps. Her reprieve was brief. A rustle in the bushes snapped her attention to the right. One of the bikers had tracked her, his silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. Scarlet gripped her blade, her muscles coiled. As he crept closer, Scarlet struck. Her blade flashed, finding its mark. The biker dropped with a grunt, his weapon clattering to the ground. Scarlet didn't linger. She melted back into the shadows, moving deeper into the forest. The chase wasn't over, but Scarlet remained in control. For now, she was the predator, and they were her prey. Scarlet moved deeper into the forest, her steps deliberate and soundless. The moonlight barely pierced the dense canopy, leaving faint shadows to guide her. Behind her, the distant rumble of engines grew louder as the gang spread out, searching. She wasn't just running. She was leading them into her domain. She reached a narrow stream and crouched, dipping her blade into the cold water to clean it. The metallic tang of blood lingered in the air. Wiping the blade dry, she slipped it back into its sheath, her mind already calculating her next move. A crack of a branch snapped her focus upward. One of the bikers was on foot, creeping through the underbrush. His breathing was heavy, his steps clumsy. Scarlet pressed herself against a tree, her hand tightening around her knife. The man approached, unaware. Scarlet struck swiftly, disarming him with a fluid motion. His weapon clattered to the ground as she pressed her blade to his throat. "Call them off," she hissed, her voice cold. His eyes widened in panic, but before he could respond, the distant roar of engines grew louder. Scarlet knocked him unconscious with a strike to the head and dragged his body into the underbrush before moving on. The forest erupted with the sounds of pursuit. Scarlet triggered one of her traps, a low tripwire that sent a biker tumbling. She didn't wait, already leading them toward a narrow gorge with sharp, rocky edges. A biker's headlight illuminated her silhouette. He revved his engine, charging, but Scarlet sidestepped at the last moment. His bike careened into the gorge, the crash echoing through the night. Scarlet climbed higher, scanning the chaos below. The gang was disoriented, their numbers thinning. Viper's angry shouts carried through the trees, ordering his men to regroup. Scarlet smirked. Let them regroup. It wouldn't save them. From her vantage point, she spotted a lone biker struggling through a dense thicket. His curses were loud enough to betray his position. Scarlet approached silently, waiting until his bike snagged on a root before striking. He fell with a grunt, and she disappeared into the shadows before anyone noticed. The forest began to thin, opening into a clearing. This one was larger, with scattered boulders and a single ancient oak at its center. Scarlet moved to the tree, activating a hidden alarm at its base, a final trap to alert her to any movement in the area. She climbed the tree, her vantage point giving her a clear view of the clearing below. The moonlight bathed the scene in an eerie glow. Scarlet waited, her blade ready. The sound of a lone engine broke the silence. Viper emerged from the shadows, his bike rumbling as he surveyed the clearing. He dismounted, his knife gleaming. "You're out of places to hide," he called, his voice echoing. "Come out and face me." Scarlet didn't respond. She watched him from above, calculating her next move. Viper was skilled but angry, his judgment clouded. She would use that against him. As he stepped closer to the tree, Scarlet dropped silently behind him, her blade ready. The hunter had become the hunted. Scarlet landed silently behind Viper, her blade poised. He turned slowly, his knife raised defensively. Their eyes locked, tension thick in the air. "You're stubborn," Viper muttered. "Most people know when to quit." Scarlet's expression didn't waver. Most people don't come looking for trouble. Viper lunged, but Scarlet sidestepped, their blades clashing in a burst of sparks. His attacks were heavy and relentless, but Scarlet was faster, her strikes calculated. She forced him to expend energy while conserving her own. The clearing became their battleground, moonlight casting long shadows as they fought. Scarlet weaved around boulders, using the terrain to keep Viper off balance. Her blade nicked his arm, drawing blood. He snarled, his movements growing erratic. Scarlet remained calm, wearing him down. The faint rumble of engines broke the silence. Reinforcements. Scarlet's stomach tightened. Viper smirked, sensing her unease. "Backup's almost here," he taunted. Scarlet feinted left, drawing him into a trap. As he lunged, she dropped low, sweeping his legs. He hit the ground hard, his knife skittering away. She retrieved the weapon and sprinted into the forest. The engines grew louder, the gang closing in. Scarlet moved swiftly, her thoughts racing. She needed to isolate them, picking them off one by one. She reached a narrow pass flanked by towering rocks, a natural bottleneck. Climbing to higher ground, she positioned herself above the path. Moments later, the first biker appeared, his headlight slicing through the darkness. Scarlet waited, her grip steady. As he passed beneath her, she dropped down, slashing his tires. The bike skidded out of control, its rider thrown to the ground. Scarlet melted into the shadows as the others arrived. Confusion spread as they found their fallen comrade. "Spread out," one shouted. Scarlet set traps. A tripwire sent another biker tumbling. A hidden snare hoisted another into the air, his shouts abruptly silenced as he dangled helplessly. The remaining bikers regrouped in a clearing, their movements cautious. Scarlet watched from the shadows, studying their patterns. Viper wasn't among them. Scarlet targeted their bikes, slashing tires and cutting fuel lines. By the time they realized, it was too late. Their mobility was gone, their confidence shaken. Panic set in. "We need to end this," one shouted. Scarlet stepped into the clearing, her blade glinting in the moonlight. "Looking for me?" she asked. The bikers turned, faces a mix of fear and anger. One charged, but Scarlet sidestepped, her blade cutting his jacket. Another lunged, only to be disarmed. The remaining bikers hesitated, their courage wavering. Scarlet advanced. You came into my territory, now you pay the price." One by one, they fled. Scarlet didn't pursue. Her focus shifted to the one who hadn't shown himself. Viper. The forest grew quiet, tension thick in the air. Scarlet moved deeper toward the heart of the woods. Viper would be waiting. The final confrontation was near, and she was ready. The forest had never been so quiet. Scarlet moved with deliberate caution, her blade steady in her hand. Every step was measured, her senses heightened. She was deep in the heart of the woods now, a place where the air felt heavier, the shadows darker. This was where it would end. Viper was close. She could feel it. He was a predator too, but his arrogance had blinded him to the reality of the situation. Scarlet wasn't just another victim. She was the storm he had unwittingly unleashed. She spotted him first. Viper stood in a small clearing, his back to a fallen tree. His knife gleamed in the moonlight, his stance tense but confident. He was waiting for her, as she had expected. "You've put up a good fight," he said, his voice carrying through the still air, "but this is the end of the line." Scarlet stepped into the clearing, her eyes locked on his. "You're right," she said calmly. "It is." For a moment, neither of them moved. The forest held its breath, the tension crackling like a live wire. Then Viper charged, his knife slashing through the air. Scarlet met him head-on, their blades colliding in a burst of sparks. The fight was brutal and unrelenting. Viper's strength and aggression were matched by Scarlet's speed and precision. She dodged and parried, her blade finding openings that left shallow cuts along his arms and torso. Viper snarled, his attacks growing wilder with every miss. "You think you can beat me?" he growled, his voice dripping with fury. "You're nothing but a scared little girl hiding in the woods." Scarlet didn't respond. She focused on his movements, predicting his next strike before it came. She sidestepped a particularly vicious lunge, using his momentum against him. Viper stumbled, and Scarlet's blade flashed, slicing across his shoulder. He roared in pain, clutching the wound, but he didn't stop. He came at her again, his knife aiming for her midsection. Scarlet twisted away, her foot sweeping out to catch his ankle. Viper crashed to the ground, his knife skidding out of reach. Scarlet pounced, her blade pressing against his throat before he could recover. "It's over," she said, her voice cold and steady. Viper glared up at her, his chest heaving. "Do it," he spat. "Kill me." Scarlet hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She wasn't like him. Killing was a line she had avoided crossing for years, and she wouldn't let him drag her over it now. She pulled back, stepping away as Viper scrambled to his feet. "Leave," she said. "Take what's left of your gang and get out of here. If I ever see you again, you won't get another chance." Viper's eyes burned with hatred, but he knew he was beaten. He nodded stiffly, retreating into the shadows without another word. Scarlet watched him go, her body tense until the sound of his footsteps faded into the night. Only then did she allow herself to relax, the adrenaline ebbing away to leave her trembling slightly. The forest around her was silent once more. The danger finally passed. She turned back toward the cabin, the weight of the night's events settling on her shoulders. This wasn't the end. Men like Viper always found a way to come back. But for now, she had won, and she would be ready when the storm returned. Scarlet reached her cabin as the first light of dawn broke through the canopy, painting the forest in hues of gold and crimson. She pushed the door open, her movements slow and deliberate. Her body ached, her adrenaline long since faded. She placed her blade on the wooden table and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment. The silence was heavy. The night's events replayed in her mind. The chase, the traps, the fight with Viper. She had survived, but the cost was etched into every bruise and cut. Yet survival wasn't enough. Not for someone like Scarlet. She moved to the sink, washing the blood from her hands. The water ran red, swirling down the drain. Her reflection in the cracked mirror caught her eye. For a moment, she didn't recognize the woman staring back, a face hardened by loss and choices she couldn't take back. Her gaze shifted to the map on the table. The red circles marking traps and vantage points stood out starkly. It wasn't just a map of the forest. It was a map of her life, the boundaries she had drawn to keep the world at bay. Last night, those boundaries had been tested. A knock at the door shattered her thoughts. Scarlett's hand went to the knife on the table, her body tensing. She moved to the window, peering out. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, silhouetted by the rising sun. He wasn't armed, but Scarlett trusted no one. She opened the door a fraction, her blade concealed behind her back. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice sharp. The man stepped forward, his face coming into focus. He wasn't one of Viper's gang. Too calm, too clean-cut. "My name's Cole," he said. "I heard about last night. You've made enemies." Scarlett's eyes narrowed. "What's it to you?" Cole raised his hands in peace. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to help." Scarlett didn't lower her guard. "Help with what?" "Men like Viper don't quit," Cole said. "They'll regroup and come back stronger. You're good, but you can't do this alone." Scarlett studied him, exhaustion battling suspicion. She didn't trust easily, but something in his eyes held steady resolve. "I've been tracking them," he continued. "You did something most wouldn't dare. You stood up to them." Scarlett's grip on the knife eased. "Why are you tracking them?" Cole's expression darkened. "They took someone from me. I've been hunting them ever since." The words hung heavy. Scarlett understood loss, but alliances, even temporary ones, came with risks. "I don't need help," she said firmly. Cole nodded but didn't leave. "Maybe not now, but when they come back, and they will, you'll need someone watching your back." He placed a folded map on the ground. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me." He turned and walked away. Scarlett watched him go before picking up the paper. It marked a location she didn't recognize. Closing the door, she returned to the table. Her blade glinted in the morning light, a reminder of the night she had survived. She traced a finger over the map. Viper would return, but now she had options. For the first time in years, Scarlett allowed herself to hope, not for peace but for the strength to face what came next. The storm wasn't over, but the dawn had brought clarity. She would be ready. The day passed in uneasy silence, the weight of anticipation pressing on Scarlett. She sat on the cabin's porch, her blade glinting in the fading sunlight. The forest was calm, but Scarlett knew better. It was the calm before the storm. Cole's map sat folded on the table inside. She had studied it, memorized the location it marked. Trust didn't come easily, but she couldn't ignore the value of an ally. If Viper returned, and she was certain he would, she might need Cole more than she wanted to admit. Dusk settled, and the forest began to stir. The distant growl of engines shattered the quiet, their echo vibrating through the trees. Scarlett stood, her grip firm on her blade. They were coming, and this time they wouldn't be so easily scattered. Inside the cabin, Scarlett gathered her gear. Her traps were set, her weapons ready. She strapped her knife to her thigh and slung a crossbow over her shoulder. She wouldn't let them surround her. She would take the fight to them. As Scarlett moved through the woods, the glow of headlights cut through the trees. The gang moved cautiously, their formation loose but alert. Scarlett crouched, watching from the shadows. 6 bikers, including Viper. Fewer than before, but no less dangerous. She triggered a makeshift alarm, a metallic clang echoing through the forest. The gang halted, their engines idling as they scanned the darkness. "Spread out," Viper barked. The bikers dismounted, moving on foot. Scarlett's plan was working. She stalked them one by one, her steps silent. The first biker didn't see her coming. She disarmed him quickly, leaving him incapacitated. The second fell into a snare, his shouts cutting through the night. By the time the gang realized what was happening, their numbers had dwindled. Viper stood in a clearing, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Scarlet!" he shouted. "Come out!" She stepped into the clearing, her blade steady. "It ends tonight," she said calmly. Viper smirked. "You can't take me down. Not alone." Scarlet tilted her head. "Who said I was alone?" A whistle pierced the air, and Cole emerged, his rifle aimed. Viper's smirk faltered. "You brought a friend," he sneered. Cole didn't reply. He and Scarlet moved as one, forcing Viper to split his focus. He lunged at Scarlet, but she sidestepped, her blade slicing his arm. He turned to Cole, who fired a warning shot that narrowly missed. The fight was brutal but quick. Scarlet delivered the final blow, disarming Viper and pinning him to the ground. Her blade hovered at his throat. "Do it," Viper growled. "Kill me." Scarlet hesitated. Killing him would end the threat, but it would also cross a line she had vowed never to breach. She stepped back. "Leave," she said coldly, "and don't come back." Viper glared, his pride shattered. He stood, clutching his wounded arm. "You'll regret this," he spat before disappearing into the trees. Scarlet turned to Cole, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. The battle was over, but the war wasn't. Together, they walked back toward the cabin. The storm had passed, but Scarlet knew more would come, and she would be ready.